Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking into, well, one of the most amazing career shifts you'll find in modern history, really. Our mission, to give you a real feel for Henri Matisse. Not just the famous painter, but the guy who started out as a law clerk, whose whole life path got completely flipped by a sudden illness. It's a kind of a shortcut to understanding this giant of modern art.
Yeah, and in this deep dive, we're really focusing on that single, unwavering path his career took. Matisse's work, from the very beginning right to the end, is just a masterclass in adapting. He was always driven by this one core idea, creating art that felt balanced, pure, serene.
Okay.
So we'll trace how he evolved, moving from that really tight, almost suffocating realism of his early training, all the way to the pure, bright abstraction of his final years. It really shows how, necessity sparks invention, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, let's kick off with that big plot twist, the moment that basically set everything in motion. Because surprisingly, the origin story for this master of, joyful color doesn't start in some sun-drenched studio. It actually begins somewhere pretty miserable, gray. 1889.
Exactly. Picture this. Henri Matisse, he's in Beauharnais-en-Vermandois, a small, frankly quite dull town in northern France. He's only 20. And he's just had emergency surgery for appendicitis. Now, back in the 1880s, that was a really risky procedure, high mortality rate.
Wow. Okay.
So he's stuck, confined to this small, restrictive sick room, probably staring at beige wallpaper, white sheets. Can't move much, bored out of his mind, and likely facing his own mortality for the very first time.
And it's this moment, this confinement, this kind of existential boredom that becomes the spark. His mother, Anna, she's just trying to help, right? Give him something to do, distract him. She hands him a simple box of paints, a beginner's set, basically, with a little how-to guide.
Just an act of kindness. Yeah. But it accidentally launches, a global art movement.
Incredible.
And what happens next is just immediate, catalytic. Matisse starts, probably quite awkwardly, just smearing color onto paper. But he's hooked, instantly. He later described that feeling not just as killing time, but like a kind of paradise.
Paradise in a paint box.
Think about it. The psychological relief of just putting color into that sterile, gray, anxious environment must have been immense. Overwhelming, even.
It's such a deep irony, isn't it? The guy who becomes the champion of vibrant light and color finds his calling when he's most confined, most surrounded by, lack of color.
And what he discovered wasn't just a hobby. It was something fundamental about how we communicate visually. He realized, almost instinctively it seems, that colors had their own language. Red wasn't just red. It was alive, bold, energetic. Blue could be quiet, profound, like a lullaby, he said. Green breathed nature, life, back into that stuffy room. He was experiencing color not as a description of something, but as pure, direct emotion.
So the moment he's back on his feet, all those years studying law, his family's expectations, the whole path he was on, it's all just gone.
Pretty much. He'd found this new language, something that felt essential, maybe even necessary for his own survival, his own well-being.
But abandoning law school, that must have been a huge decision.
Oh, it was a massive risk, took incredible conviction. His father, who ran a pretty successful seed and grain business, was apparently horrified. When Henri announced he wanted to be a painter, not a lawyer, the story goes his father just went pale.
I can imagine.
And then came the prediction, you'll starve. And, his father wasn't just being dramatic. For most young artists trying to make it in Paris at the end of the 19th century, that was actually a pretty fair assessment. Starvation was a real possibility.
The reluctant student and the search for feeling. 1890s.
But Matisse was driven now, right, by this newfound necessity. So he heads off to Paris in the 1890s, arrives in this city that you described as a fever dream, gas lamps, new ideas exploding everywhere, art scenes bubbling up. But his first step is quite conventional. He enrolls at the Académie Julian.
Yeah, and the irony is just striking. He arrives searching for color, for life, for that feeling he found in the paint box, and he gets plunged into this environment that seems designed to just crush all of that.
How so?
Well, the Académie Julian was incredibly strict, hierarchical, utterly obsessed with tradition. The curriculum was all about rigid drawing, mastering anatomy from plaster casts, copying old statues. Everything was basically grayscale. It was designed to hammer individuality out of you, force you into this very specific mold.
He found it really oppressive, didn't he? That phrase he used, dust and despair, it paints quite a picture.
It really does. Tells you everything about the atmosphere. He was supposed to be mastering rules, learning technique, but he felt like he was losing that amazing discovery he'd made back in his sickbed. The vibrancy was just draining away.
So how did he cope? How did he navigate that without just giving up?
He kind of became a rebel, but quietly. through his own study. While all the other students were dutifully copying the famous Renaissance masters in the main halls of the Louvre, Matisse started exploring the museum's edges.
The periphery.
Exactly. He became the sort of unauthorized scholar of the lesser arts, things the establishment didn't value as highly. He ignored the Raphaels, the Titians, the stuff everyone else was focused on.
So what was he looking at instead? The forgotten treasures.
Precisely. He spent hours looking at Islamic ceramics, old textiles, Persian miniatures, and crucially, African sculptures, which were just starting to appear in ethnographic collections in Paris around that time. This is absolutely vital for understanding his later work.
Okay.
Art historians can pretty much trace his fascination with what he later called decorative rhythm, and that characteristic flatness in his paintings directly back to these objects he studied in the Louvre.
Let's pause on that decorative rhythm. What did those non-Western objects teach him that, say, a big Renaissance painting couldn't?
Well, they showed him that color and pattern don't have to serve the illusion of three-dimensional space. Traditional Western art for centuries had been about creating this window onto another world, using shadow, perspective, foreshortening to make things look real, look solid.
Right.
But the Islamic tiles, the textiles, the African carvings, they often used color and line for pure expression, for creating these repeating rhythmic patterns. They embraced flatness, two-dimensionality. They showed him you could create a sense of depth and movement, not with shadows, but just through the interplay of line and color placed next to each other.
So rhythm could replace perspective.
Exactly. That idea became absolutely foundational for him. He was learning to reject the core rules of Western art before he'd even really mastered them in the traditional sense, which, as you can imagine, must have created a lot of friction with his teachers.
Absolutely. And that leads to that great story, maybe it's a myth, maybe not, about him sort of accidentally inventing abstraction.
Right. The myth of the still life. The story goes he was struggling like mad with a simple painting, trying to get the reflections on a bowl of fruit just right, perfectly realistic. And he got so frustrated with the limits of realism, he just lost it. Smeared paint everywhere, saturated the canvas with pure color, basically abandoned trying to capture the form and just went for raw emotion.
And the result was not good.
Well, by academic standards, it was a total mess, a failure. His teacher apparently scolded him, where's your discipline? But Matisse looked at that colorful mess, and instead of seeing failure, he saw something else. Potential. He recognized the expressive power that came from letting color just dominate the lines, dominate the form. He realized that his accidental outburst of frustration maybe held more truth, more artistic possibility than all his careful efforts at just mimicking reality.
Luckily for him, he eventually found someone who kind of got it. He left the Académie Julian, moved to the École des Beaux-Arts, and ended up studying under Gustave Moreau. Now, Moreau was a symbolist painter, which seems maybe a bit counterintuitive for a future modernist, but his advice was apparently game-changing.
Moreau was absolutely key, because he saw past the technique. He looked at the students' inner world, their potential. Even though his own work was symbolist focused on emotion, myth, psychology, his teaching style was incredibly forward-thinking for the time.
And his big advice?
Simple, but profound. Don't imitate, create. That became Matisse's mantra for life. Moreau essentially gave him permission, gave him the license to trust his own gut feelings, his own emotional response to the world, over just trying to copy what was in front of them.
That emotional freedom must have felt liberating. He started noticing things differently, right? Like painting late at night under the gas lamps.
Yeah, the flickering oil lamps, the gaslight in Paris.
Yeah.
He realized the way that artificial light distorted colors, how it bent reality, was actually more interesting, more evocative than painting in the cold, clear light of day. It was another justification, another reason to play with color, to distort it.
But life was still really tough.
Oh, incredibly hard. He was living cheap in Montparnasse, couldn't afford basic materials half the time. We know he sometimes painted over old canvases again and again, or even used scraps of wallpaper he found just to have something to paint on.
Wow.
And the early critics, the ones rooted in tradition, they just dismissed his work, called it clumsy, unrefined.
Wasn't there that famous dig from another student, something like, Matisse paints like a child?
That's the one, which years later Matisse actually embraced. He famously added, yes, but with the genius of one. But back in the 1890s, it was just part of the struggle, the constant grind. He needed some stability.
And he found it in his marriage.
In 1898, yeah. He married Amélie Pereire. She was a milliner's assistant, very grounded, practical, fiercely loyal. Kind of the opposite of the stereotypical dreamy artist. She became his emotional rock, his anchor. And very quickly, his most important model, though maybe long-suffering is the better word, given the colors he'd eventually paint her in.
They definitely needed that anchor because the money situation was dire, right? His paintings just weren't selling.
Not at all. It got so bad he was literally forced to barter his art for basics. There's that documented story which really sticks with you about a local butcher who apparently got an early Matisse canvas as payment for meat and groceries.
Imagine that today.
Right. Imagine the struggle of trying to maintain your artistic vision when you're trading paintings just to eat. And it's during this period, this time of real self-doubt and hardship, that he starts really articulating his philosophy, writing about seeking an art of balance, of purity, of serenity. He was looking for a kind of calm in his art that was totally missing from his chaotic everyday life.
The two turning points, Monet and Cézanne.
Okay, so Matisse is struggling. He's got the technical skill, but he's still searching for that bridge, right? Between the academic structure he was taught and the emotional freedom he craves. And to find that bridge, he looks to two huge figures in French painting. Figures who seemed almost opposed, but together, they gave him the blueprint he needed.
This is such a critical moment. He realizes the old guard, the academic world, just can't teach him what he needs to know. His first big breakthrough comes around 1899, thanks to Claude Monet.
The language of light.
Exactly. He sees Monet's impression, Sunrise, the painting that basically kicked off the whole Impressionist movement. Monet's work was all about capturing that fleeting moment, the shimmering effect of light, the raw sensory feeling of being outdoors.
And Matisse's reaction was immediate,
Yeah.
profound. He said the painting breathes. It was like, boom, suddenly understanding the language of light.
Yeah.
It shifted his whole philosophy. Painting wasn't just passive copying anymore.
No, it became an active expression of feeling. The goal wasn't just to paint what your eye sees, but, as he put it, what the heart feels when the eye sees it.
That's a powerful distinction.
Huge. And it immediately changed how he worked. His brushstrokes got looser, his colors got brighter. He started painting lighter, freer, more alive, trying to capture that emotional energy, that sensation. Monet gave him the freedom to ditch the tight realism for pure sensory input, but freedom without some kind of framework can just lead to chaos.
Right. So if Monet gave him the freedom, the emotion who gave him the structure, that brings us to Paul Cézanne.
Cézanne. Totally different from Monet's shimmering, dissolving forms. Cézanne offered density, solid geometry, almost an architectural approach to building a painting.
And Matisse saw this and knew he needed it.
Instantly, he understood he needed Cézanne's kind of rigor to balance Monet's freedom.
Yeah.
Cézanne taught him that color don't just show light, color can actually build space, construct it. Instead of using traditional perspective lines, Cézanne used shifts in color temperature, warm colors coming forward, cool colors receding to create forms, build planes on the canvas.
And Matisse became obsessed, famously buying that small Cézanne still life, right? Spending money he absolutely didn't have.
He did, kept it in his studio for decades, called it a kind of compass.
What did that compass do for him? What was its function?
It was his structural guide. It showed him how to get that feeling of density, of solidity, without relying on traditional shading and volume. If you look at that Cézanne still life, you see how simple things like apples or a bit of drapery are broken down into almost geometric blocks of color, yet they still feel solid. They have weight, internal structure.
Okay, I see.
So when Matisse starts working on paintings like Lux, Come Volupte, or in 1904, you can see him using this. The figures aren't dissolving in impressionist light. They're placed quite firmly, almost like sculptures. But then they're rendered in these incredibly bright, totally non-naturalistic colors.
So he puts them together. Monet gives him the wild, emotional color palette.
Right.
And Cézanne gives him the underlying architecture, the stable structure to hold it all together. He now has permission to use color insanely, but there's a geometric logic underneath, stopping it from just becoming, well, wallpaper.
Exactly. It's that perfect balance. And it allowed him to move beyond Impressionism, which he started to find maybe a bit too fleeting, too ephemeral. He wanted something more solid, more enduring. And then the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, coming from outside Europe entirely, really confirming those early interests he had back in the Louvre.
The non-Western stuff again, boosted by the big 1900 Exposition Universelle in Paris.
Absolutely. He was completely captivated by the displays of African masks and oceanic carvings at the exhibition. They were like the ultimate confirmation of his interest in that decorative rhythm. These objects were so simplified, so direct, so powerful. They conveyed deep feeling with minimal means. They had structure, but they were emotionally abstract.
So it all comes together. Monet's light, Cézanne's structure, and this affirmation from African and oceanic art.
That combination pushes him right to the edge, right to the brink of fauvism, of modernism proper.
Meanwhile, the academics are watching him basically throw away all his hard-won training. They must have thought he was crazy.
Or deliberately provocative. They accused him of losing discipline, of just trying to shock. There's that great quote from a critic later, looking at his evolving palette, who called it a box of fireworks gone off by accident.
Not exactly a compliment.
No. But Matisse was becoming resolute. He was moving past needing their approval. He starts to internalize the criticism, almost flipping it, realizing that what the establishment calls wrong might actually be the start of a different kind of right. He begins to paint with this growing conviction that his internal vision, what he felt, mattered more than just copying the external world.
The Wild Beasts and the Shock of Collier, 1905.
Okay, so the slow burn, the synthesis, it's all done. Now it's time for the explosion. This brings us right to 1905, the birth of Fauvism, and the scandal that basically put Matisse on the map overnight.
It really ignites with a summer trip. Matisse travels down south to Collier. It's a small fishing village right near the Spanish border. He goes with his friend, another painter, André Derain, and the light there, the Mediterranean light. It's famously electric, just overwhelming.
And when the light is that intense, it messes with how you see things, right? Especially shadows.
It changes everything. Shadows stop being just black or gray. The sun is so blindingly bright that the shadow of, say, a tree trunk on a white wall might appear deep violet or blue, or sometimes even green and orange. It's the effect of complementary colors bouncing around. So they weren't painting the look of the village anymore. They were painting the feeling, that overwhelming saturated sensation of just standing in that intense light. They started rejecting what's called local color. The actual color of the object. If they saw a tree trunk that was green, they might paint it bright red instead, just for the emotional impact.
So the paintings they brought back to Paris for the big 1905 Salon d'Automne exhibition, they must have looked completely alien.
Utterly unlike anything the Parisian public or even the avant-garde had really seen before. People walked in expecting, polite landscapes, maybe some impressionism. Instead, they walked into this room that felt, according to one account, like being ambushed by just explosions of pure raw color.
And the centerpiece of this shock was Woman with a Hat, his portrait of Amélie.
Yes. Her face wasn't painted with realistic skin tones at all. It was just a riot of clashing colors, yellows, greens, violets, bright reds, all colliding right there on her face and hat. And they placed it right in the middle of the room. It was like, as someone said, a dare, a challenge to everything the art world thought it knew.
And we have to thank the critic, Louis Vauxhall, for accidentally giving the movement its name, right?
We do. He's looking around at all these wildly colored canvases, completely bewildered, and then he spots a relatively traditional Renaissance-style sculpture standing in the same room. And he apparently muttered, "Donatello au milieu des fauves." Donatello among the wild beasts.
Les fauves, the wild beasts. And the name just stuck.
Instantly.
Yeah.
Even though it was meant as an insult to put down, Matisse, Derain, Vlaminck, Marquet, the core group, they just owned it. They loved it.
Let's dig into Fauvism itself for a second. It wasn't just about using bright colors, was it? There was a specific technique behind making the work feel so aggressively modern, so jarring.
Right. It was about how they used the color. They were taking the principle of complementary colors opposite each other on the color wheel, like red and green or blue and orange, and using them with, violence.
Violence?
Yeah, if you put pure red right next to pure green, they don't just sit there calmly, they vibrate visually. They create this optical buzz, almost an electric shock to the eye. The Fauves were slapping paint straight from the tube, pure, unmixed color onto the canvas, and deliberately putting these complements side by side to make the paintings feel active, intense, almost noisy.
So no subtle shading, no trying to depict volume.
None of that. They were using color, pure color, as the only tool to express heat, light, emotion. Forget about describing the object. They wanted to convey the sensation.
Well, the brushwork reflects that. Loose, maybe even aggressive.
Definitely. The handling was quick, unblended. You can see echoes of the Impressionist, maybe Van Gogh too. But the colors themselves were far more intentional, more symbolic, less about capturing fleeting light, and more about expressing a sustained emotional state. Matisse summed up the Fauvist goal pretty simply. I simply wanted happiness to look the way it feels.
Just convey the emotion directly, bypass the intellect.
Exactly. Let the color hit you right in the gut.
And despite the outrage people fainting, critics saying the colors burn the eyes, the work actually sold, which is maybe the best kind of validation for an artist.
Absolutely crucial. Woman with a Hat, the painting that caused the biggest scandal, was bought by Gertrude and Leo Stein. They were American expats living in Paris, and they became hugely important early patrons of modern art. Their purchase basically cemented Matisse's reputation overnight, and it instantly made Gertrude Stein's salon the place to be for the avant-garde. That's where everyone who was anyone, including a young Spanish guy named Pablo Picasso, would end up gathering.
And Leo Stein had that great quote defending the painting, didn't he? Something like,
Yeah, he supposedly told a skeptical visitor, "You'll learn to like it, or at least you'll never forget it," which really captures the power of that visual shock. It was unforgettable.
Matisse quickly follows this up with what many see as the big Fauvist manifesto painting, The Joy of Life in 1906.
Right, it's this huge monumental pastoral scene, nude figures dancing and relaxing in this impossibly bright, colorful landscape. The scale is enormous, but the space is totally flattened. There's zero attempt at realism. It's built entirely from these flowing, rhythmic patterns and just overwhelming feeling. Pure color, pure line.
And the critics went nuts again.
Oh yeah, fury. They called it the end of civilization. Said the artist used color like a weapon. They found it too decorative, too simple, too childish.
And through all this scandal and debate, you get this lovely picture of Amélie's resilience, just gracefully putting up with being painted with a green strike down her nose or an orange face.
Her quote is wonderful, isn't it? So practical. It's better than being painted dull. You have to admire her.
But Fauvism, for Matisse, it wasn't the final destination, was it? It was more like a necessary explosion.
Exactly. It was the spark he needed. The moment he proved to himself and the world that he could harness the raw power of color. But he pretty quickly realized that the sheer chaos, the roar of Fauvism, was actually kind of counter to his deeper, long-stated goal, finding that art of serenity, of balance.
He needed to move beyond just the shock value.
He did. He needed to find a way to contain that fire, to give the intense color, that architectural structure that Cézanne had shown him. He had that great phrase later, looking back, saying that the wild beast had learned to purr. He needed to refine it, channel it.
The decades-long duel Matisse and Picasso.
Okay, speaking of turning points and influences, we absolutely have to talk about the other giant who looms over the rest of Matisse's career.
Yeah.
The one artist who seemed to both challenge him and, in a way, validate him constantly, Pablo Picasso.
Ah, yes, the big duel. Their meeting, which happened thanks to Gertrude Stein around 1906, basically sets the stage for the entire trajectory of 20th century art. It wasn't just a rivalry, it was this ongoing visual conversation, a lifelong competition built on, surprisingly, deep mutual respect, despite their radically different ways of working.
They were the ultimate odd couple, weren't they? Matisse, calm, methodical, orderly, quite formal in person. A man of real measured precision. And Picasso. Intense, restless, chaotic, always pushing against boundaries, aggressively anti-establishment. Someone famously said that going between their two studios was like moving between heaven and a thunderstorm. Great description.
Yet underneath it all, they absolutely knew how important the other one was. Picasso had that famous joke, all things considered, there's only Matisse. And Matisse, always more philosophical, quipped back, only one painter truly understands me, Picasso. It was this strange relationship fueled by the challenge of having someone else operating at that same incredibly high level, even if they were going in opposite directions.
Matisse himself summed up their difference perfectly, didn't he? He said something like, Picasso breaks things apart while he tries to put them together.
Exactly. He said Picasso cuts things open while I try to make them whole. Picasso deconstructed the world, took it apart, looked at it through fragments and sharp angles. That's cubism, right? Matisse, on the other hand, was trying to distill the world, find its essential core, its harmony, make it whole.
And you can see this dialogue playing out in their actual paintings, like a back and forth.
Oh, absolutely. It's a visual duel, canvas by canvas. When Picasso drops Les Demoiselles d'Avignon in 1907, that huge aggressive painting with the fractured forms and the raw African mask-like faces, it's a massive challenge, not just to Matisse, but to the very idea of painting.
And art historians often read Matisse's Blue Nude, Souvenir de Biskra, which he painted around the same time, as his sort of immediate, quieter reply.
It's often seen that way. It's this incredibly powerful, solid figure. Sensual, but also a bit unsettling. He uses this strong, confident line. He refuses Picasso's fragmentation, refuses to shatter the form, but it has an equal intensity, an equal engagement with those non-Western forms they were both looking at.
And this kind of visual conversation just continues for decades.
Nonstop. Much later, when Matisse paints the Red Studio in 1911, that incredible painting where almost everything is drenched in this intense, flat, crimson depend, Picasso responds not long after with a phase of paintings using sharp, almost severe, gray, monochromatic geometries. They're constantly pushing each other, forcing each other to justify their choices, almost using the other's style as a kind of critical mirror for their own work.
Meanwhile, Matisse himself is starting this big shift, moving beyond the shock of Fauvism toward that goal of pure serenity. He starts filling his studio with things that embody harmony for him.
Yes, Persian carpets with their intricate patterns, North African textiles, musical instruments like violins and lutes. Everything in his immediate environment becomes part of his study in rhythm and pattern.
His trip to Morocco in 1911 was a big deal too, right?
Hugely transformative. The light there, the colors, the patterns in the tiles and fabrics. He wrote that the light was so intense that even silence has a color. He came back with this deeper understanding of how to use large fields of intense, flat color and really simplified compositions. You see it especially in his Odalisque series with those powerful blues and pinks.
And he brings all that together, the intense color, the flat pattern, the rhythm, in one of his most iconic works from that period, The Red Room, Harmony in Red from 1908, which is just, wow, a total rejection of traditional perspective.
Completely. Everything, the walls, the tablecloth, the patterns on them, it all melts into this single, continuous, overwhelming field of crimson red. There's almost no distinction between vertical and horizontal planes.
It must have totally baffled the critics. Where's the depth? Where's the space?
They asked exactly that. Where is the perspective? And Matisse's reply is just key to understanding his whole philosophy. It's not about the illusion of space, it's about the expression of color. He wasn't trying to fool your eye into seeing depth. He was trying to create this contained, total environment where the viewer is just enveloped by color itself.
Okay, but let's push back on that idea of serenity for a second. Crimson red was a pretty aggressive color, right? Consuming. If his goal was a good armchair for the soul, as he famously said, why use such an intense, almost agitating color like red instead of a calmer blue or green?
That's a really important question. And I think the answer is that for Matisse, serenity wasn't about being passive or sleepy. It was about achieving a kind of stable harmony within intensity. He used that overwhelming crimson precisely because it flattened everything out, because it was anti-illusionistic.
How does that create calm?
Because the wall and the table are the same intense red, your eye can't find a vanishing point. It can't create perspective. The space stops moving visually. It becomes contained, total, held together by the power of that single color. So the intensity of the color actually functions like a boundary. It isolates you, the viewer, inside that painted world, away from the visual chaos of the outside. It creates a state of internal focus, internal repose. The armchair he wanted was about stability, structure, containment, not necessarily about softness.
That makes sense. And this move towards simplification, towards finding that essential core, required enormous discipline, didn't it? He had to learn to leave things out.
Absolutely. The courage to eliminate. You see that so clearly in a painting like The Pink Nude from 1935. It looks so effortless, so simple, just a few flowing lines define the whole figure. But we know the process behind it was brutal.
How so?
He didn't just arrive at that simplicity easily. That final, clean, economical line was the result of literally hundreds of sketches, studies, variations. He would rework the same pose again and again, drawing, erasing, redrawing, constantly simplifying, stripping away everything non-essential until, as he put it, nothing unnecessary remained. That, for him, was mastery, having the courage to eliminate.
And while he's pursuing this intense artistic focus, his personal life is shifting too. His marriage becomes strained.
It does. But his daughter, Marguerite, becomes an incredibly important figure for him, a real confidant, an ally. She later showed incredible bravery herself, risking her life working for the French resistance during the war. Matisse seemed to need these deep, quiet anchors in his life to sustain the intensity of his work.
The final revolution painting with scissors.
So as we move into the later part of his life, the late 1930s, early 1940s, we hit this final and maybe the most revolutionary phase of his entire career. And it's one that's born entirely out of physical crisis.
Right. His health takes a major downturn. He has this huge intestinal surgery around 1941. He survives, calls his recovery a second life, but that second life comes with a really profound physical limitation.
Yeah, he could no longer stand for long periods, couldn't work at an easel in the traditional way anymore. For most artists, that would probably be the end of their career.
But not Matisse.
Not Matisse. He's the ultimate adapter, right? He just invents a completely new way to make art. Often confined to his bed or sitting in a wheelchair, he starts drawing with scissors. He creates these incredible cutouts, the gouache découpé.
Pure invention, born straight out of necessity. Yeah. But the process itself is really fascinating. It wasn't just him randomly cutting up bits of paper. It was quite involved.
Oh, it was meticulous. First stage, his assistants would paint large sheets of paper with vivid gouache paint. Gouache is this opaque, water-based paint, and the quality was crucial because it gave him these perfectly uniform, intensely saturated blocks of color to work with. They'd paint up these huge sheets, bright blues, yellows, reds, greens, and store them flat, ready for him.
And then came the scissors.
Then came Matisse. As sitting there, maybe semi-reclined, he used these long tailor's shears, and he cut directly into those sheets of pure color. His assistant, Lydia Delektorskaya, described how he held the scissors like a violin bow, with this incredible rhythmic precision, like a conductor or a musician.
Wow.
He was literally drawing with the scissors directly into the color. What he achieved was this perfect, instantaneous unity of line and color. In painting, you draw the line, then you fill it with color. Here, the edge of the cut was the line, and it was inherently colored. He eliminated the gap between drawing and painting. Color and line became the exact same thing at the exact same moment.
And his studio basically transformed into this giant three-dimensional sketchbook.
It did. He'd have his assistants pin the shapes he cut out, leaves, figures, stars, abstract forms, directly onto the walls of his apartment, his studio, and Nice. And they'd move them around like these huge, movable collage elements, shifting them, adjusting them, until the rhythm, the overall composition, felt absolutely perfect to him.
His room literally became a garden of paper.
Exactly. The walls just bloomed with these oversized paper leaves, dancers, abstract forms. And the contrast is so striking, isn't it? The frailty of his aging body, often confined to a bed or chair, versus the absolutely youthful, vibrant, explosive energy of the art that was surrounding him, covering his walls. He really found a new kind of liberation in old age. He even admitted this method released me from the fear of perfection. It was so direct.
And the key works from this period, things like the sheaf, Blue Nudist Second, the snail, they're just perfect examples of this final synthesis, right?
Absolutely. They're like symphonies of pure color and rhythm. He achieved what he called pure essence color without contour. It's the culmination of that lifelong search.
And this final, incredibly productive, serene phase leads to maybe his most ambitious project ever. In 1948, he designs the Chapel of the Rosary in Vence, down in the south of France, for Sister Jacques Marie, who had been his nurse.
Right, and this wasn't just a commission for a few paintings. He designed the entire space. The architecture, the altar, the candlesticks, the vestments, the murals, and crucially, the stained glass windows.
This feels like the ultimate expression of that quest for the good armchair for the soul. How did he use this new language, the cutout sensibility, the pure color and line, to create a space for spiritual comfort?
He designed the whole atmosphere to just envelop you. The most dramatic part is definitely the stained glass. He used primarily 3 colors. This vibrant lemon yellow, representing the sun, God's light, a soft leaf green for nature, the earth, and this incredibly deep, profound, ultramarine blue for the heavens, the Virgin Mary.
And the effect.
When the Mediterranean sun shines through those windows, it projects these huge fields of pure yellow, green, and blue light onto the stark white walls and floor of the chapel. The colors constantly shift and move with the sun. It's like being bathed, literally immersed in colored light. It's incredibly peaceful yet vibrant.
And against that colored light, he put his signature line drawings.
Exactly. On the opposite walls, which are covered in simple white ceramic tiles, he created these enormous, incredibly simplified black line drawings. The Stations of the Cross, St. Dominic, the Virgin and Child, just pure, essential black line on white.
So you have the structure and the stillness from the black lines.
Right. They provide the anchor, the framework.
And then the fluid, intense, emotional color from the stained glass light washing over everything.
It's the ultimate balance he was searching for. Structure and emotion, color and contour, stillness and light, all working together in perfect harmony.
When the chapel opened in 1951, it was hailed as a masterpiece, wasn't it? Even by his old rival.
Even Picasso had to admit it. He reportedly called the chapel, quite simply, Matisse's masterpiece. It was this profound statement that art designed purely for beauty, for spiritual feeling, for serenity, could be just as powerful, just as important as art designed for confrontation or intellectual dissection.
And the cutouts themselves continued right up until the end, culminating in that amazing artist's book, Jazz.
Jazz, yes. A collection of prints made from his cutouts, paired with his own handwritten poetic texts. He explicitly compared the creative process, that improvisation with color and shape, to the improvisation in jazz music, finding freedom within structure.
And some of those final huge cutouts are just breathtaking, like the snail from 1953.
The snail, yeah. That massive spiral of colored paper blocks. He apparently referred to it as charting the journey of the snail. Maybe a metaphor for his own slow, methodical, rhythmic progress towards his artistic goals over his long life.
And then, right at the very end, it seems like he finally found that piece he'd been chasing for over 60 years, looking at one of his blue nudes on his wall.
The Blue Nude the Fourth, yeah. He supposedly whispered just before he died, "There, I have finally found the line that rests." As if that lifelong search for the perfect, essential, calm line was finally complete.
When Matisse died in 1954, it really felt like one half of the engine driving modern art just stopped. How did Picasso react?
Picasso was apparently devastated, truly heartbroken. He painted a simple white dove in Matisse's honor, and he lamented famously, "When Matisse died, he left me his odalisques," referring to Matisse's famous paintings of reclining nudes, "and I will never be able to do them justice." That long competitive duel ended not with bitterness, but with this profound sense of loss and immense, undeniable, mutual respect. Outro.
So if we look back at that whole incredible journey, starting as this frustrated law clerk in a drab gray sick room, ending as the master of this vibrant paper garden, Matisse's ultimate achievement wasn't really about shock, was it? It was about finding clarity. He showed a whole generation of artists and us that you can find profound meanings in simplifying things and getting down to the essence of something rather than just capturing all its fussy details. He didn't just change art. He kind of gave us this whole new universe where ordinary things can suddenly feel extraordinary just by changing their color, their rhythm.
Absolutely. And his influence is just everywhere, even if you don't always realize it. You see his spirit in the clean lines of modern graphic design, definitely in the bold use of color in contemporary fashion, in the rhythmic patterns that define so much decorative art today. He really proved definitively that color isn't just decoration tacked on at the end. It is emotion. It is structure. It's the main vehicle for creating harmony. His whole career was built on that conviction. The internal feeling, the sensation, that's the real subject.
And Matisse's lifelong search for serenity, which, amazingly, started in that incredibly restrictive gray room. It really does offer a deep lesson for all of us, for you listening, about adaptation, about finding your purpose. He discovered that true serenity, that good armchair for the soul, isn't necessarily found by avoiding chaos or difficulty. It's found by learning how to compose it, how to take the intense, sometimes clashing colors of life, and arrange them into a harmony, into a rhythm that feels right, that feels compelling.
So maybe let's leave you with this final thought, something drawn from his own deep well of wisdom. Matisse once said, quite beautifully, "There are always flowers for those who want to see them." If this man, who faced mortality early on, who faced artistic rejection and financial starvation, could find his own kind of paradise in a simple paint box, and eventually learn to paint not just with the sun, but almost as the sun itself in those cutouts, then what quiet, colorful revolution might be waiting for you? What might you discover simply by having the courage, like him, to eliminate the unnecessary noise and shift your perspective just enough to find your own essential rhythm, your own flowers?